And a note ahead of our next interview about prisoner rights. We warn it could be especially sensitive for those who are victims of crime. Earlier this week on AM, it was revealed prison guards are also victims of violence in units.
Staff assaults are a regular occurrence. One assault that I'm aware of over the weekend where a staff member was assaulted in a unit. Seems the only reason the staff member wasn't severely assaulted was due to a prisoner stepping in and helping.
Our interview with Corrections that day also stirred up debate around conditions for prisoners, which are alleged to include overcrowding, double bunking and not being allowed out of their cells at reasonable intervals. Measures which could go against the UN human rights principle that prisoners are also entitled to be treated with dignity and respect. Heather Keach's brother is in jail and she joins us now. Heather, thank you very much for your time this morning. What are the conditions that you are hearing about from your brother about the conditions he's been kept in?
Staff shortages, I think, is the biggest issue. At the moment, they have 40 men in his unit, and they are wanting to add in another 20 to make it 60. They don't have enough staff at the moment to deal with the 40 that they have. So they are very concerned about how they're going to cope with extra men coming in. Also too, that would mean that a lot of men have to double bunk. And there are men that have this status put on them, which means they don't have to double bunk. Religious reasons, mental health reasons, valid reasons. And they've been told that they don't care that they have this status, they don't care what the issues are, that they do have to double bunk.
And what do you think this is, what is the impact on prisoners of the growing numbers that they're being incarcerated with?
Mental health issues. Mental health issues are really a really big problem in prison, and there's no help. There's no counselling available. There's just no help at all. We have these ads at the moment campaigning to try and get prison officers in, and they go on about how they're there to help. Unfortunately, that's not what it is realistically. I'm sure the officers do want to help, but they have their hands tied. Prisoners get told no all the time. They don't get asked, how can we help?
Have you been able to visit, or do you know of instances where people who are in prison haven't been able to see their families for extended periods of time?
No, not personally, no. I visit my brother every week. No, that's not really the issue. From where my brother is, from his unit, no, that's not really the issue. It's just, sorry.
No, sorry, Heather, to interrupt. I just, going back to what you were saying about the prison guards, there will be people who are watching and probably many people who actually don't have a lot of sympathy for those who are in jail, especially for those who are in there for very serious crimes.
Absolutely.
Can you appreciate that?
Oh, absolutely, 100%, 100%. There's a real misconception, really, with men that are in prison. I mean, you probably only really hear about the really bad ones, but there are a lot of pretty normal men in there who've just made mistakes, made bad decisions, and have ended up in prison. So, but at the end of the day, they still have rights. They may have their freedom taken from them, but they still have rights. And when mental health issues are not being addressed, there are men in there that are contemplating suicide because it's the only way they can see getting out of the situation that they're in. And this is a real issue.
Heather Keach, whose brother is incarcerated, and we appreciate you coming on and sharing your story, your experience, Heather. I want to take you now to Cosmo Jeffrey. He knows much about this issue too. He's the president of the Canterbury Howard League for Penal Reform. Cosmo, thank you very much for joining us. Heather mentioned there double bunking. What is the issue with double bunking?
Well, the issue is that New Zealand signed the United Nations Convention. In the United Nations Convention, it clearly states that people will be housed in one cell per person. The cells that are built in all New Zealand prisons are built for one person. And now suddenly they're being double bunked, so 2 people are in one space.
What kind of impact is this having on prisoners while they're there and potentially for their ability to rehabilitate while they're in prison?
Well, imagine if you're in one space and you're locked up for more than 22 hours in a day. You're lucky if you get out for 2 hours. Some prisoners haven't been getting out for 24 to 28 hours. And so you're locked up with someone you don't want to be with them. The space is 3 metres by 4 metres at the most. You have to do everything in that space. You have to go to the toilet. You have to have your meals. There are 2 people who don't want to be together, and they're locked up in this space for extended periods of time. It creates tension, clearly. I mean, imagine if you're in that space, how would it be?
Cosmo, when we're talking about human rights too, though, we also have to think about the prison guards, right? And we've heard this week on AM that they have been subject to a number of assaults and potentially increasing number of assaults. So don't you also have to take into account their rights in terms of organising the prisoners and keeping themselves in a position that is safe?
Yes, you do. But there are spaces, maybe some people have to be asked if they can shift to another centre, but there are spaces in other prisons. It's not that the spaces aren't there. Corrections have known for years that they're heading towards staffing issues. They should have been planning way back. And now suddenly it's become a hot issue. We see television ads and suddenly they're trying to do something about it.
Do you think that the conditions for prisoners currently are worse or are more likely to breach human rights than, say, a few years ago?
Yeah, that's difficult to say, but from the time we signed that convention, we were out of law. And that means that when we signed it, people were being double bunked and then been double bunked ever since. And people were kept in cells for more than 22 hours. So why did we sign it? It's just, it makes no sense to me at all. It's a systemic problem that corrections haven't got on top of, and now it's come to a head. I feel for the corrections officers, but if you lock up 2 people together who don't want to be with, you're obviously going to have tension, you're going to have aggression, and it's going to boil over. So if they really want to reduce violence in prison, then they need to get rid of double bunking. They need to have United Conventions control over what's happening, and people need to get out into the fresh air and have time on their own.
President of the Canterbury Howard League for Penal Reform, Cosmo Jeffrey. Appreciate your time this morning. It's 7:15. We've also received a statement from Corrections. We asked them onto the show. They weren't able to be here in person, but they did say in a statement that there is no overcrowding in any of our prisons. They pointed out that the prison population is lower now than it was in 2018, but that's when its numbers had peaked. But they say because they've been moving prisoners around because of COVID measures, that there has been a temporary increase in double bunking. So they pointed to one day this week. They said it was approximately 33% of the prison population double bunking this week. That is down from 42% when you compare it back to 2018. And in terms of being allowed out of your cells, they say that this applies daily. So you are allowed a minimum of 1 hour of physical exercise a day, but that's not necessarily over 24 hours. So if you were allowed out in the morning one day and the evening the next day, it means that yes, possibly you could be in a cell between 24 and 28 hours without being allowed out.